Good evening. This is really the official start of a series on Raja Yoga. And so for that reason, tonight is entitled Science of Religion. But before we engage in this, let us say our prayer for teacher and student. By now you will all know it. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great vigor and energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Now, this is not exactly a talk. It's more like a study. And so there would be some interaction on this. We are picking up the book Raja Yoga by Swami Vivekananda for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a very profound foundational textbook. In an age of science, it is presented in a form of rationale, and Swami Vivekananda has created this great commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras. That means this book is in two sections. The first section is a very useful general commentary, giving various details where there may be some confusion about the whole process. It was in response to a commentary. They thought, those people around him in America, this man's name is French, he's Vivekananda. Vivekananda, how long will he linger with us in this land? Why doesn't he show us the Indian rope trick and go home? So this book really dictated the response to, well, here with the Indian rope trick. This is the foundation of spirituality and religion. And so Swami Vivekananda presents this subject to us with a preface, with an introductory, with a brief practical understanding. These are the first steps that we can follow. And discussing what is prana, because prana, even today, is a very misunderstood subject. And then psychic prana, otherwise called thought. And then how can we control this? And then what is called pratyahara, withdrawing the attention or consciousness from the mind. Dharana, steering it in a specific direction. And then finally dhyana, where only one thought remains in the mind, and samadhi, where no thought is there at all. And then discussing the subject in brief. So it's very, very comprehensive. Second section, of course, is on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras themselves. So I'm going to assume that we have not discussed this before. What do we mean by sutra? Sutra or sutya is a thread. It means an aphorism, one or two words, maybe one line. And in other words, whatever the teacher has discussed, by triggering the mind or memory from a brief saying or aphorism, the student can recall everything that we all discussed on it. We don't have to repeat every single angle, every single dot, every single comma, every single cough in the conversation. And so because of this, two things are required. One is a commentary. Swami Vivekananda has provided one for us. And this is gleaned from the great commentators of his day, Vyasa, Vachaspati's Gloss, and other classical commentators. And he's brought it in brief, easily digestible form. Second thing is a living teacher that is able to elaborate on these and discuss. And because I'm saying discuss, you can feel free to put your hand up or ask a question in chat, and I will stop And if you want to elaborate on your question, you're free to do so, and we can answer it. So this is really a study. So what do we mean by science? Well, skill, to know, to investigate, if you will, to find out, to inquire, because man essentially is a curious creature. Man would like to find out everything there is to know about his environment. We can see the difficulty of very early primitive man. Everything was a puzzle. Born into a world of forces, some benign, some violent, some malevolent, and having to protect himself in caves. Great discovery of fire was there. And fire would have created shadows on the wall. Fire would have served to resist wild animals, but it would also enable our thinking. Today's thought that I put out in the EVS chat reflected an episode from the Chandogya Upanishad. Satyakama Jabala was born from a maidservant. He wanted to learn everything there was to know, and so he went to a revered teacher. What is your lineage? And he said, I don't really know. I asked my mother. She said, I was a maidservant. I traveled here and there. I don't exactly know what your lineage is. But your name is Satyakama, and mine is Jabara. You can say Satyakama, Jabara, and Satyakam, of course, you who desires the truth, we can say. They're kind of play on words. The teacher says, oh, only a knower of Brahman, only somebody who's truly truthful, a true Brahmin, would have answered in this way, so honestly, so truthfully. I will teach you. But you see, he left him to his own devices. And he made a deal with him. His instruction was, go and look after a herd of cattle. And when they multiply to a certain level, then you can come back. And not a long distance, some small way from the ashram, but it meant he had no comfort, no protection. He had to sleep in the open, hard work. What kind of teaching is that? But you see, the very fact of our inquiry reveals a truth somewhere. It has a capacity to start the internal wheels in motion. And these wheels are divine wheels. They're internal to us, and they're always operating. Even when you sleep, the mind is still working, solving problems, if you will, bringing things up from the unconscious. In fact, Patanjali identifies 5 types of waves in the field that we call the mind, and one of them is sleep, but no mention of dream. Well, dream is sleep plus memory. No need to mention it separately. All our memories come up, the unconscious mind. In other words, these ancient yogis, Patanjali and Kapila, who authored the Sankhya system, would have had a great deal of knowledge about the workings of the psyche or the mind, and would have had a spirit of investigation, what we call science today. The ancient rishis would have investigated science. They would have tried to find out what the world was around them, and seeing that there had to be always an observer of it, wanted to pursue what is this observer. In other words, if you take your own self as a unit, the inquiry is, what am I? What am I? Who am I? And so Patanjali Sutras arranges themselves in 4 sections. The last section is the most telling, because the last section, having gone through how you arrange something, how you conduct your life, gives us a purpose and gives us eventually, where are we headed with this? This is called Kaivalya. You may interpret it as freedom, independence, isolation. Isolation from what? It tells us about a certain philosophy. So Patanjali Yoga Sutras is the elucidation of a certain philosophy in brief aphorisms, aphoristic style. It's a dualistic system. This we have to bear in mind. But Swami Vivekananda gives us an extra dimension, a deeper dimension of it, because dualism doesn't really give us the detailed answers. There can always be some argument against dualism, and some difficulties arise. The dualistic system is that there are two entities. Nature, what is nature? Nature is all the things that that exist in the observable universe and beyond. All the things that we are capable of observing, either directly with the senses or inferred beyond them, including the subtle area of the mind. And so, in the last chapter, if you like, of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, some philosophical arguments are brought about. If you think that you are the mind, then we have to ask this question: who is observing it? And if you say there's another mind, it simply kicks the can down the road and begs the question, who is observing this again? And whatever is knitted together as an arrangement, as a compound, will have to be for the benefit of an individual. And so to find the final answers, we have to bring out some other tools. It's all right. We can work with dualism for the time being. The system says that the other side of it, the dualistic side of it, nature being on the one side, is Purusha. But we all have a separate and different Purusha according to that system. Same with the Sankhyas. But that doesn't really make any sense. Because if the last chapter is to do with Kaivalya, this isolation, a witness, then can there be more than one witness if that witness has a characteristic of non-objectivity? Something that is completely subject. You see, the mind's different operations of the mind can also be subjective. A person's individual experience will be observed entirely by themselves, but still there's a problem. There's an observer and something that is observed. Now we have to bring out the profound teachings of the Vedanta philosophy and its final conclusion of non-dualism to make any sense of it. But step by step. And so Patanjali Yoga Sutras in this book is arranged. Firstly, Swami Vivekananda gives us a wonderful introduction to the subject. And then you see the first chapter would be on yoga. Yoga meaning concentration. Concentration, its spiritual uses. Why is it there? Why should we bother about it? What value has it? And then, that's fine, the principle has to be laid out. Whenever you lay a subject out, you have to understand what is the principle. And then you have to understand what the practice is. Now, if we talk about science, science operates on a very controversial, old-fashioned idea that lingers across from theism. That is, that all the laws of nature are all immutable and unchanging and unchangeable. Very recently, some scientifically minded people have questioned, because there are so many question marks now in modern science. It used to be the fact that, and I think it was Lord Kelvin who pronounced at the beginning of the 1900s, we now understood everything. Everything is deterministic. Just a few T's to cross and I's to dot. Otherwise, we know it all. And then the whole thing was disrupted. By 1905, with Maxwell and Einstein and all the rest of it, everything was disrupted. And now, according to our modern theories of cosmology, for example, and physics, it seems that we know very, very little about the observable universe. According to what is called the Lambda cold dark matter model, there is such a thing as invisible matter called dark matter, comprising 25% of what exists. Some 70% and odd is called dark energy, and very little fraction, maybe 4%, including invisible gas and dust, is what we see when we look out at stars and so on. Of course, when we look at the mini universe and compare it to what we know now, so modern scientific technology, it's very, very small and puts things much more in perspective. So when we talk about science, we also have to talk about a principle. We also have to talk about laws. And these laws are immutable or seem to be immutable because prior to, let us say, the 18th century, maybe even the 17th century, and the modern mathematician and great scientist Isaac Newton was a theist. He believed in a God that ran the universe like clockwork, with great regularity and rhythm. And certainly we see great regularity and rhythm everywhere we look. But we also see chaos. And so his view was the chaotic aspect of it, we don't know about. But if we know every single variable, every factor, we can predict with great certainty whatever will happen in the future in the universe. And we can explain what is here now. Unfortunately, this has all been disrupted. And so as science has progressed in modern life, the whole idea of a ruling God has been overthrown. Why is it? It's because from Descartes separated things, had a dualistic system, matter and mind. And with a dualistic system, it creates now a God and a creator and a creation. And if everything is working like a clock, then the great creator made the clock, wound it up, and is now gone on celestial holiday because the universe can run by itself. It doesn't require anything else. And so that leads to a system called deism. And thinking people say, whoa, wait, maybe there's no creator. Maybe there's no necessity for it. Maybe there's nobody who winds the clock up. Maybe it just runs by itself. That is very ancient thinking. It is thinking that says, no, Prakriti or nature is self-sufficient. Now, the yogic philosophy doesn't exactly say that. It says, yes, it is self-sufficient in a way, but its activity is because of a certain proximity, and that gives the other dualistic dimension. There has to be what is called Purusha. What is Purusha? Purusha is derived from two Sanskrit terms, Puri and Purna. Puri means a city, inferring that this Purusha, this person, as if you want to literally put it, this person is an indweller of a city. We have enough scriptural context to validate that statement. For example, Kathopanishad talks about Ekadwaram, an 11-gated city. Ekadasha Dwaram, 11-gated city. Bhagavad Gita talks about a 9-gated city. This body is like a 9-gated city or an 8-gated city, 11-gated city. So the one that dwells in it is unborn and his consciousness is unchanging. So that's that indweller. But supposing you think that something is truly inside, then you'll maybe make a mistake. You maybe think that is an imprisoned splendor. There's a book called from Reynold Johnson, a great scientist in his day, who has a book, The Imprisoned Splendor. Very often we use that term. The real, authentic self seems to be in a kind of prison, internally, captured, like a bird in a cage. And it has to be liberated, has to be freed. Here comes Vedanta to the rescue. If it is imprisoned, it is restricted, it is limited, it is finite, then that doesn't meet all the criteria for something that is subjective, purely subjective. And so we have to resort to the Vedanta to say, no, it actually was never restricted or bound. It just feels like this. So we have to modify this with our Vedantic understanding also. And then Patanjali, having laid out the various practices that comprise broadly speaking, what we understand to be meditation, because this is the way of meditation now. And every system of meditation will have to follow in some way the various practices laid out. Then what will be the result of it? Well, you will get some things. You will get some heightened powers. In other words, you will exploit your full potential much, much more. But you see what to do about it. Well, the start of the last chapter will say, well, it's much better if you eschew, if you spit out these powers. They have no value. You will gain them, no doubt. But if you don't have the wisdom to use them correctly, then you'll be a circus performer, and your one obstacle that is laid out that will surely stop you is egoism. And so that won't be any good. And so the last chapter will therefore be the final goal, independence. As I mentioned so many times before, we have to really take cognizance of Swami Vivekananda's an extract from his commentary, because it summarizes the whole thing. What's the purpose of life? Is there a goal? Are we aimlessly moving? In modern science, in biology, for example, modern evolutionists, new Darwinian evolutionists, who are materialists and reductionists, will want us to go nowhere. Illogically, they will say, since a fossil record indicates maybe some kind of direction, we'll ignore all of that and we'll say, perhaps there's no direction and therefore no purpose. Perhaps we are born and we live and we die and there's the end of it. Why should we speculate anything further? And so the yogis also have this idea of evolution, but make much more sense of it. We might call it the flow theory of evolution, because that is already present. Your whatever will manifest potentially is already there. It's only unfolding. This is the name, the meaning of the term evolution, something that unfolds. And so these Patanjali Yoga Sutras answer and relate to many questions of modern science, and it is a scientific subject presented in scientific terms. And because of that, it's laid out scientifically, that is, with no axe to grind, with no particular bias. For this reason, Swami Vivekananda, who stated already each soul is potentially divine, and the goal is to manifest this from within, and then gives us the result and the method, and tells us about religion as well. Now, this opening talk, if you will, or study of Raja Yoga is entitled The Science of Religion. Can religion be a science? Let's continue understanding what Swami Vivekananda is saying. Each soul is potentially divine. How do we know this? Because if there is an evolution anywhere, then the beginning must also be the end. Do we have any examples of that? Yes, a seed evolves into a tree, and the seed gets manifested from the tree again, and the whole thing continues as a cycle. And if we study any aspect of nature, we find this same pattern going, a cyclical pattern. So that you cannot get an oak tree or a huge tree or a banyan tree if that same thing is not potentially contained in the seed. How is it possible? The end thing must be the beginning thing in subtle form. Is a law that is there. Now, since we abandoned, or the modern science abandoned the creator, in other words, the lawgiver, they still have a hangover. We have the laws, and the laws are irrationally eternal. Modern thinkers, as I say, are now debating, should they be eternal? Would it help if they were evolving as well? Or maybe they're changing over time. Or maybe there are other universes where the current laws that we observe are here in this universe, but there may be other laws somewhere else. All these possibilities are now being thought about on the basis that we cannot explain certain things within the universe. And the laws of nature are simply a record of things that are observed in a regular succession. And therefore, no matter which way you look at it, they seem to hold true, and they're endorsed by mathematics. This is really the definition currently in science of a law. Very difficult to create a definition. What are the laws of nature? There are observed regularities in nature that are repeated, that are universal, and that work out mathematically. You can give a mathematical equation for it. But let's not have a lawgiver, is their argument. Now, Sankhya, on which this dualistic system is based, twin philosophies of Sankhya and Yoga are there. Sankhya is atheistic, does not require a god. And if you ask, well, why is the earth or the world in such a turmoil? The Sankhyas will say, this is due to wrong thinking. Nothing to do with an interfering or jealous or punishing deity that sits among the clouds. It's your own thought, your wrong thinking has produced this. What's my remedy? Please correct your thinking. And the yogic philosophy goes along the same lines. The only difference is it does have a god somewhere. But the idea of a god is an unusual definition. Technical term is Ishvara, the Lord. That is that being that is a supreme knower, that is a supreme teacher supremo. Because when we say we know something and start our scientific investigation, we find a limit. And when we find a limit, the inference is there must be something beyond the limit, beyond the limit, beyond the limit, until you find as ultimate teacher or knower. You can't go any further than this. This is technically called Ishvara. Nothing to do with devotion, nothing to do with love of God, nothing to do with creator, none of this. This is what is understood as God or Ishvara in the yogic philosophy. So we know what science is, and perhaps there's a methodology that can be applied throughout. If we say there's a science of religion, the same methodology applied to science must be applied to religion also. We'll discuss that shortly, but let's find out what is religion. Swami Vivekananda gives a wonderful definition. Religion is realization. Don't forget, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest. The act of manifestation is called religion. This is the whole of religion, he says. Then he says, dogmas, doctrines, temples, churches, books, all of these things are but secondary details. Rituals are but secondary details. In Europe, there's a wave of anti-religious sentiment. It's an awkward thing if you say God in any conversation. It is assured in much of Europe because it's seen to be medieval, out of date, incompatible with modern science. But religion comes from two potential definitions. One is Cicero's. It comes from relegere. Relegere, to read again. In other words, to examine, to study. And to study what? To study the experience of those people who have done the experiment before us. And that is contained in that subjective experience that comes out in scripture. What is scripture, therefore? It must be viewed as the record of somebody who has subjectively asserted, I have found the inner being. I have found the meaning of life. I have seen what you call God. I have understood the soul. I have directly experienced this. Swami, at least Sri Ramakrishna, used a wonderful example, simple example, as is his wont. Some people have heard of milk. Some people have seen milk. But those who really understand it are those who taste milk. I don't know. We have to change the example if you're lactose intolerant. Never mind. So it is this experience that is recorded. And because of that, we have to often take what is termed scripture and sort it out. Sort out what is the experience and what is irrelevant to us. Much of scripture is a mixture of sand and sugar. And we want the sugar, we want the sweetness. But you see, the scriptures that we're talking about contains absolutely, this is it, this is the experience. And that is why Patanjali Yoga Sutras is the scripture, if you will, of the yoga philosophy. Even so, it has to be validated in the light of the Vedas, because it is an orthodox system. It is Ashtika. Orthodoxy means it conforms to the Vedas, regardless of the interpretation. It's validated by its authority, its reference to the authority of the Vedas. Now, there are 6 such philosophies, and the most significant that we know of are Sankhya, Yoga, and then there is Uttara Mimamsa, what is called Vedanta, and then there was Mimamsa, to do with rituals and to do with incantations and mantras. There is Jnana, which provides us with a very rigorous logical methodology in philosophy, and we can take variations of that. And so there is Vaisheshika, which is to do with atomic structures. We can pretty much bypass those that we are not actively using today in the modern world, but what is valid is Sankhya, Yoga, Uttaramamamsa, otherwise known as Vedanta. Now, just to clarify a brief misunderstanding that could occur, talking about Vedanta, Vedanta encompasses 3 approaches: a dualistic approach, a non-dualistic approach, and in between a Vishishtadvaita approach, that is a qualified non-dualism. These we can explain later. But right now we're focused on the dualistic system of yoga. So what is conventionally understood as religion, we can bypass even the term if you like, but if you take the other derivative, religio, as opposed to religere, to read again, then we have an inferior definition, or the possibility of an inferior definition, that which binds, which provides us with laws and rules. Now, laws and rules have a certain function, have a certain necessity. A child is lost without rules and boundaries. It becomes insecure and confused. If you just allow it the freedom to do whatever it likes, there must be guidelines for molding the character of a child, no doubt. But in terms of religion, there are 8 stages or 7 stages, really. Let's compare it to the growth of a child, physical and psychological. This is called the earliest stage of a child's social development, the sweet, innocent stage that accepts and has to accept everything as true. Very often, this is the start of religious understanding, blind faith, if you will. We can start off with that. And you see, when we talk about religion and faith and belief, if you examine it, it is belief in belief. In other words, completely rational. And the vast bulk of humanity believe things because they believe them. That's the end of it. But this is an immature stage in human development that grows, because then, to enhance the child's social evolution, there has to be some rules put in place. If you put it then in a religious context, there is a God that becomes a lawgiver, or becomes a rewarder and a punisher, because this is part of the child's development. Reward and punishment are part of a short-term motivation strategy that every parent is obliged to use at some point. And then, as the psychosocial evolution develops, as the child changes its social status and goes to school, the laws become more stringent. They become more enforced. And so God can be seen in this context as a judge or lawgiver. The breakthrough comes when you go beyond this, when you get into a stage of community development in religion, where you go to a communal gathering. And I always mention where you have a number of physical exercises. So at one point you stand up, you sit down, you kneel here, you sit there. That is not really religion, because this comes within the context of secondary details, according to Swami Vivekananda. The real growth comes when you take responsibility for your own development. And so, in terms of the social development of a child, by high school, say, they realize, I don't have to study now, or I don't have to study by force. I don't have to rely on parents to force me to study. Voluntarily, I'll do it. I compare myself to other students. I want to do well in exams. I want to pass junior certificate. I want to pass leaving certificate or A level or whatever your system is. And then you work in a way that is self-motivated. In this same way, the start of this religion, which is realization, starts here. An internal examination, an internal pilgrimage, a journey within, and the next level beyond the physical, beyond maybe mere survival strategies, will be to examine the psyche. And so psychology now has a value using the technique of introspection. Whether it's good or bad, whether it's Freudian, Jungian, or whatever it is subtle. To try and understand the internal subtle workings and dimensions of what we call the mind. And even now, we don't really fully understand it in a scientific way. However, the Sankhyas understood fully the geography of the mind, and the yogis knew how to control it. Patanjali gives us directions. He's concerned only with the mind. He's concerned only with concentration. He's not concerned with doctrines or rituals. He's not concerned with superstitions. He's not concerned with beliefs. He's not concerned with blind faith. That is what makes it a science. Now, the whole process in science as a methodology will be to take a credible authority. In this case, we're taking a scripture, or a rishi, or a sage, or a teacher. We're taking provisionally what he has or she has to say as true. We're finding out what is the experiment that we have to do, and then we're engaging in the experiment, and then we're validating and verifying it for ourselves through direct perception ourselves, seeing whether it is true or false ourselves, with this understanding that everything is from within. There is a general principle in science that we want the highest generalization. That is why there's a great search in physics for a unified field theory, for a theory of everything that encompasses everything. Some kind of route that you can go to that then says, I understand this fundamental. And the ancient Greek idea of fundamental particle was an atom. Curiously enough, it was disbanded in the 19th century. And then by the 20th century, it came back into its own, and atomic theory became validated. And then the atom, as the smallest particle, was also disbanded. Now, what is the smallest? It is not a particle at all. Electrons are fundamental particles, but they're not particles. We're just using the convenience language. They just behave in some way like it. They're fuzzy things. They're agitations, oscillations, perturbations in Hilbert space. It means nothing to us to describe it in this way. And so then they do not behave as particles behave. It is electrons have their own space, as it were, and they're antisocial, and they can't crowd anything. This is Pauli's exclusion principle. You can't have two in the same field. One has to be displaced. And it doesn't move in time. It's like bank transfers. If I transfer or you transfer money from your account to mine, it disappears in your account and reappears in mine. Nothing went anywhere. It didn't have to go by Express or DHL or FedEx. So these are some of the curious mysteries now. So what is fundamental to us now? Not particles. It is not even protons. It is not electrons. It is not even quarks. It is none of these particles that have been discovered at Large Hadron Colliders. No, the most fundamental thing is this curious field called quantum field. And John Wheeler, the great physicist, had this to say about it. He had produced a wonderful graphic description, a kind of concept, quantum foam, where things appear and disappear. We understand this well in the light of the yogic theory of Maya. Things appear, things disappear. We have no idea, and they annihilate each other very quickly and disappear into the quantum foam again. It's a curious thing, a head-scratching moment, and a question mark. What is this, and why does it happen? So, this is an inscrutable part of nature. Now, with this in mind, and the methodology laid out for us, let us see what Swami Vivekananda says in the preface. He starts off, since the dawn of history, various extraordinary phenomena have been recorded as happening amongst human beings. These various phenomena have been explained in various ways. For example, in early Christian times, there was a belief in magic. Christians were, there's great evidence now to show that Christians had a kind of Christian magic. In the early church fathers might say that if you eat this body and blood of Christ, you'll be transformed into a state of immortality. These were some conceptions oriented around the whole concept of magic in those days. And what we know as chemistry was really alchemistry, alchemical processes to do with finding the nectars of immortality, if you will, and things like this, transforming base metals into gold. And that has come out as chemistry today. So, witnesses are not wanting, says Swami Vivekananda. And he says in modern times, of course, his times are also modern for him, to attest to the fact of such events, even in societies living under the full blaze of modern science. We have to understand that in Swami Vivekananda's day, in the 19th century, there was a tremendous interest in the Western world about spiritualism, about telepathy, about all kinds of phenomena. And there's still this interest today. It's only dressed up a little differently. It's dressed up as, again, spiritualism or spiritualism. It's dressed up as kind of new age concepts, crystal healing, and all these various phenomena are there. And there may be something in it, of course. But many people believe many things with no hard scientific evidence. And today, people are looking towards science. Having had a military coup against religion, there are many people who say, oh, I don't believe in God. I do believe in angels. I do believe in elms and fairies and so on. And leprechauns. Of course, in Ireland, we all believe in leprechauns. So, the vast mass of such evidence is unreliable. Even so, it's unreliable. Why is it unreliable? Because there's no evidence for it. It's purely speculation, as coming from ignorant, superstitious, or fraudulent persons. Some people honestly believe it. Some people are just ignorant. Most people are superstitious, but some are fraudulent people. In many instances, the so-called miracles are imitations. But a valid question he brings up is, but what do they imitate? And it's not the sign of a candid and scientific mind to throw overboard anything without proper investigation. I mention again this book, The Imprisoned Splendor, by Reynold Johnson, PhD, and he has taken the trouble to investigate all these unusual phenomena. And he's written this book some time ago, but now there are people who are introducing various concepts within the scientific community, such as panpsychism, that explains quite a lot. Anyway, what are they to imitate? He's pointing out that if a true scientist is a scientist, he should investigate these phenomena. Surface scientists, that is, scientists who don't really want to delve into the awkward questions, unable to explain the various extraordinary mental phenomena, never mind physical phenomena, strive to ignore their very existence. And today there's a language for it. People call it woo-woo, a kind of derogatory term. And even scientists who have gone through this investigation are often ridiculed by the modern scientific community as fringe scientists relegated to the outer realms. Unfortunately, there is as much dogmatism called scientism in this modern world as there are dogmatic religionists. Some examples of that is the Big Bang Theory, which is there in most academic textbooks as fact. And yet, modern discoveries are increasingly showing evidence against it. Even going back in history, it was one great scientist, Boltzmann, who committed suicide because his fellow scientists laughed at his suggestion that there were such things as atoms, or that atomic theory is an ancient Greek idea. We're modern people, we don't believe in such a thing. It wasn't until not too long ago that it was understood that there was ether, that all phenomena was carried through the messenger, the ocean, if you will, of ether. This has resurfaced now under a different name, that is fields, the field theory, but nevertheless, this was replaced. So science is a vacillating area of investigation where we can see historically how some things were held as sacred, dogmatic. Let's take the realm of biology. Neo-Darwinism is now of the 1970s, held on to by many, most evolutionary biologists, is now being overthrown in the light of modern physiology and the discovery of the new realm of epigenetics. And so it's not easy, even though scientists today say, oh, we're open-minded, we like to be proved wrong. This is how science advances. Secretly, they really don't wish to be wrong. Dark matter. Dark matter is an area that is difficult to come to terms with. We can't prove it. We have no evidence for it. And after all, nobody can see it. It doesn't respond to anything. Dark energy is on its way out as well. I think, in my view, but in the view of many scientists, there's no necessity for it. Because the original investigation that said this universe is expanding in an accelerated way, a re-examination of the data with increased technological investigation and doing away with assumptions that are unwarranted, such as the homogeneity and the of the universe. The idea that the universe is the same in all places is smooth. Clearly, the universe is not smooth. The universe is clumpy. And no matter how far you go out in modern investigation, you still find it clumpy. You still find new galaxies being formed there. And so that changes the whole interpretation. And it may well be that we're involved in what is called a bulk flow. We don't understand or why that is. That gives us acceleration in one way and deceleration in the opposite direction. Maybe we only measured it in one direction. So these are some tricky things, but that can also lead to dogmatism. And the same goes with investigating things like psychic phenomena. Anyway, they strive to ignore their existence, says Swami Vivekananda. He continues, they are therefore more culpable than those who think that their prayers are answered by a being or beings above the clouds, or those who believe that their petitions will make such beings change the course of the universe. From the start, he's taking out the whole idea of an extra cosmic creator God or gods, where prayers are sent to, either in a realm called heaven, where there's a cosmic fax machine or cosmic email, whatever it is, or a cosmic WhatsApp there, something like that. No, he's saying from the very start, he's knocking out that superstition. He's saying it's all happening from inside you. Right from the start, he's saying it in this preface. Anyway, the latter who believe in that, and that's most religious people, they have the excuse of ignorance, or at least of a defection system or a defective system of their education. They're not broad-minded enough. Those people in religious life who assert the superiority of a particular religion, when you ask them, did you study comprehensively every other religion? Did you do a course on comparative religion? No, we only studied this. We don't want to study anything else. This closed-mindedness, of course, will be defective education. This defective education has caused a lot of difficulties in human existence. Anyway, this defective education system, Swami Vivekananda goes on to say, which has taught them dependence upon such beings, a dependence which has become a part of their degenerate nature. And if he had expanded on that, he would say it exhibits the worst possible human characteristic, that is that of weakness. Every base of defectiveness is from weakness. What we call sin is weakness. What we call ignorance is weakness. The former have no such excuse. The scientists don't have such an excuse. They're well-educated people. And a scientist should be broad-minded, surely. For thousands of years, such phenomena have been studied, investigated, and generalized. What a wonderful statement. First of all, they have been studied, they've been investigated, they've gone inwards to the inner dimension, causal dimension of it, and generalized, because the most truthful position would be the most generalized position. If we know where, in Swami Vivekananda's language, if we know that's one element in chemistry from which all the other chemical elements come, we've known the whole of chemistry. In that same way, if we know the fundamentals of physics, we know every phenomena within physics, whether it's at the quantum level or whether it is at the relativistic level. Quantum gravity is a holy grail of modern physics today. And physics is, of course, the basis for every science. We will only find the truth out from two avenues: physics and mysticism. Physics and this mystical investigation, that is, the investigation that goes inward. In both cases, there has to be an inward investigation. So, investigated, generalized, the whole ground of the religious faculties of man has been analyzed thousands of years ago. And the practical result is this science of Raja Yoga. And Raja means royal, and Yoga means a system of uniting. In this case, uniting the attention to its object. In other words, it's a treatise on concentration. When you have concentration, then you can yield every secret that the universe has to offer. The key is in taking the attention or the attentive faculty of the mind and directing it in a specific way. This is called concentration or yoga. Just to verify that, in Patanjali's first sutra, he tells us that yoga is now being explained, probably more comprehensively than any before. And then he tells us, gives a definition. What is yoga? Yoga is concentration. That's the meaning. That's what he means by yoga. Today you go and ask people what is yoga, and they tell you, oh, it's a system of physical culture. No, it has very little to do with that. Yoga, in terms of a practice, involves concentration, regardless of whether it is bhakti yoga, karma yoga, or any other kind of yoga. Let us see how we can verify this. Bhakti yoga means, in the words of Jesus, in fact, he's quoting Deuteronomy and I think Leviticus, saying, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength, your whole being. In other words, in a concentrated way, without any distractions or diffusions. Let's take karma yoga, putting your whole mind into a unique activity. This is karma yoga. Without any anxiety, without any disturbance, what is the fruit of it? You give up the fruits immediately. You're only doing this unit activity, concentration. What is jnana yoga? Jnana yoga is continuously concentrating on the existence that is before us, trying to understand what is the thing that never changes, and as opposed to the thing that is ever changing, a constant appreciation of that kind of discrimination, a form of concentration in this way. So whichever way, whichever system you think is valid for you, concentration is what is required. Taking all your energy and concentrating in one direction. And in the case of Raja Yoga, it is your psychic energy. So with this introduction, we'll leave it off. And I said it would be interactive. I've done most of the talking. But anyway, we probably have maybe another, 2 minutes or so. So we can take any comments on what we have studied so far, or anything else to do with the system of Patanjali Yoga Sutras or Raja Yoga. In studying this, you see, we're going from the beginning of the book right the way through, thoroughly, because every word that Swami Vivekananda utters is a gem, is loaded with precious meaning. Well, you all seem satisfied with this session. I look forward to picking this up next Tuesday again, where we continue with the preface and investigate deeply the various aspects of this in conjunction with Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji. Pranam, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Oh.